Several hundred people marching through the city's canals, yelling Bezos out of the lagoon and no space for Bezos.
Jeff Bezos just spent $50 million on a wedding in Venice, and the locals are furious. Protesters filled the canals, celebrities flew in by private jet, and a crocodile nearly crashed the party, kind of. But behind the glamour, there's a bigger story unraveling. Secret venue changes, quiet donations, and a city on the edge. This isn't just a wedding. It's a mystery dressed in designer tuxedos. From the fog-shrouded vows to the final twist that has Venice calling it a sellout, here's what really went down, and why people are still talking. Number 1, the Venice takeover.
Protesters shooting smoke flares off Venice's famed Rialto Bridge.
It started with a quiet hum of private jets. Not 1, not 10. Over 90 flights reportedly touched down at Venice's Marco Polo airport, each carrying celebrities, billionaires, influencers, and at least one guy who probably just tagged along for the free champagne. Venice, already packed during tourist season, suddenly became the backdrop for a real-life Bond film starring Jeff Bezos in a tailored tux and Lauren Sánchez with 27 wardrobe changes queued like browser tabs.
The outlet reported that the Amazon founder planned to celebrate during the 3-day extravaganza at a 16th century hall.
The hotels? Booked out. The gondolas? Reassigned. The water taxis? Rerouted to serve only the elite. The entire city began to feel like a film set, and not the indie kind. We're talking full Hollywood production. For 1 week, Venice wasn't Venice. It was Bezosville. And if you were a local, good luck grabbing your usual espresso without bumping into a Kardashian, a security detail, or both. For many residents, this didn't feel like a celebration of love. It felt like an invasion.
But was forced to cancel after protesters threatened to surround the canals around the venue with inflatable crocodiles to prevent guests from arriving.
Picture living in a centuries-old city that already struggles with rising water levels and over-tourism, only to wake up and realize your hometown's been turned into the VIP lounge of the world's richest man. The air was filled with cologne, drone cameras, and barely concealed resentment. To outsiders, it might have looked like an extravagant fairy tale, but to many Venetians, it was a harsh reminder of who truly holds the power. A man worth nearly $200 billion didn't just rent out a venue. He occupied an entire ecosystem, one gondola at a time.
One of the most romantic cities in the world, but there's not a lot of love here for billionaire Jeff Bezos.
Even the logistics were surreal. Water buses were disrupted. Police sealed off entire blocks. Residents were told to expect increased activity, which is a polite way of saying, please go around the yacht. Tourists who booked their dream Venetian summer ended up in the background of someone else's high-budget honeymoon. And while it all looked glamorous on Instagram, under the surface, tension was growing. Protesters were watching. Activists were mobilizing. The locals had seen this script before: foreign wealth, temporary gloss, long-term erosion.
We think that one big billionaire can't rent a city for his pleasure.
Except this time, they weren't planning to stay silent. Because while Bezos and Sánchez were finalizing guest lists and fireworks, a group of angry Venetians had something else in mind. Inflatable crocodiles, surprise rallies, and a protest so effective it would force a total change of plans. But we'll get to that. Let's just say the honeymoon wasn't the only thing that got postponed. Number 2, protests and hidden crocodiles. While Bezos and Sánchez were busy curating the ultimate billionaire guest list. Oprah? Check. DiCaprio? Of course. Mass protests? Not quite what they expected. Enter the locals. Specifically, a grassroots protest group called No Grandi Navi, and their angrier little cousin, No Space for Bezos. These weren't just disgruntled residents, they were Venetians with a flair for drama. Because when you're dealing with the richest man on earth, shouting isn't enough. You bring inflatable crocodiles. Yes, protesters threatened to unleash giant blow-up crocs into the canals. Think Sharknado, but with reptiles and a political message. Their goal? To block the planned reception venue, the prestigious Scuola Grande della Misericordia, a centuries-old building in the heart of Venice. Elegant, historic, and extremely easy to protest. That's when Bezos' team realized something. You can buy the party, but you can't buy silence. So they pulled a fast one. The entire event was relocated to the Arsenal, a fortified military-era complex that's basically the medieval version of gated community. With its high walls, limited entry points, and heavy police presence, it was the perfect fortress to keep out inflatable reptiles and inconvenient signs that said things like, "Venice is not for sale." Which, ouch. Behind the scenes, this was a massive logistical pivot. Security ramped up, guests were rerouted, and all of it, every moment, was wrapped in secrecy. The protesters had done their job. They forced the richest couple in the world to change the narrative. And they weren't done yet. The crocodiles were just the opening act. On the ground, the energy was shifting. banners were being painted. Mannequins dressed as Bezos were being prepared to take a ceremonial swim. Activist groups were strategizing not just to protest the couple, but to protest what they represented: unchecked wealth, climate hypocrisy, and the corporate colonization of public spaces. Meanwhile, Bezos' team was doing damage control in a tuxedo. The wedding wasn't just about love anymore. It had become a high-stakes chess match between spectacle and rebellion. And while the Crocs never made it to the canal, probably for the best, no one wants a drone collision, the message did. Venice wasn't rolling over. It was watching. And as the sun began to set over the lagoon, a new kind of storm was forming. One that would challenge not just the event, but the meaning of celebration itself. Because the wedding was still happening. But the mood, it was about to get foggy, in more ways than one. Number 3, ceremony in the fog. With protest banners hanging just out of frame and inflatable crocodiles deflated in defeat, Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sánchez quietly slipped away from the spotlight, onto a boat bound for San Giorgio Maggiore. If Venice had a press here for drama button, this island church would be it. Picture this: a 16th century basilica rising out of the lagoon, silent, hauntingly beautiful, and now the site of one of the most expensive weddings in recent memory. And yet, the moment was oddly still. No paparazzi drones, no screaming fans. Just a lingering fog that wrapped the island like a curtain, muting the chaos of the mainland. It was the kind of setting that whispers secret society, more than romantic ceremony. And maybe that was the point. The vows were said behind closed doors. No live stream, no leaks. Except, of course, the rumor that Matteo Bocelli, son of Andrea Bocelli, serenaded the couple during the exchange. And while no one can confirm it, let's be honest. If you drop $50 million on a wedding and don't get at least one Bocelli, did it even happen? But the mystery didn't stop there. According to insiders, the event unfolded with themes: Gatsby-era glamour, masquerade balls, even foam parties. Yes, foam, because nothing says eternal commitment like suds in your designer shoes. And then there were the outfit changes. Lauren reportedly had 27 wardrobe switches throughout the celebration. That's not a wedding. That's a Broadway revival with intermissions. Each looked more extravagant than the last, custom-tailored to scream, "I've arrived," while still whispering, "But I'm tasteful." Yet for all the sparkle, something felt distant. Guests described the vibe as elegant, magical, and curated. Not emotional, not intimate. This was less two souls uniting, and more scene 4, take 7. And maybe that's what happens when your wedding budget rivals the GDP of Iceland. The scale becomes too big for the feelings to land. It's hard to cry tears of joy when you're checking your 4th outfit for champagne stains. Still, the photos, what few emerged, looked like they were shot on the set of a prestige film. The lighting was cinematic, the framing suspiciously perfect. You could almost hear the soundtrack swelling in the background. But as the sun dipped below the skyline and the fog rolled back in, one thing became clear. This wasn't the grand finale. Because while the couple toasted to forever, a very different kind of drama was brewing across the lagoon. And this one had a guest list of its own. Number 4, the star power spectrum. If you judged a wedding by its guest list, this one looked less like a marriage, and more like the Met Gala got lost on the way to New York. One by one, the ultra-famous touched down in Venice, turning the floating city into a red carpet that just happened to have canals. Oprah Winfrey arrived looking like the Oracle herself. Kim Kardashian showed up with a dress that may or may not have cost more than a house in rural Italy. Tom Brady strolled in like retirement was a costume party. Even Ivanka Trump made an appearance, suggesting that somewhere in Bezos' address book, politics and pop culture are filed under the same tab. And then there was Leonardo DiCaprio. The man showed up in a hoodie, dark sunglasses, and a face mask, basically dressed like a teenager sneaking into an R-rated movie. Whether it was an attempt at privacy or performance art, it didn't go unnoticed. Viewers online called it out for what it looked like. The same guy who lectures the world on climate change had just flown into Venice on a private jet again. And that became the buzz. Not the vows, not the outfits, but the optics. Because while the wedding glowed with luxury, the criticism burned louder. Social media lit up with questions. How many emissions did this guest list generate? Why were climate activists protesting just outside while billionaire guests toasted under chandeliers? Is it even possible to throw a $50 million wedding and still be considered in touch? Some fans defended it as just a celebration. Others saw it as a tone-deaf parade of wealth, especially at a time when Venice is literally sinking and locals are being priced out of their own neighborhoods. It felt like a tale of two cities. Inside the arsenal, champagne flutes and celebrity selfies. Outside, protest signs and rising frustration. Even the fashion sparked tension. Some designers praised the wedding as a couture masterpiece. Others, like Katie Couric, famously called one of Lauren Sánchez's dresses tacky, a word you don't often hear in billion-dollar circles. But here, it cut through the sparkle like a blunt knife through fondant. And yet, for all the noise, the event moved forward. The photos kept coming. The hashtags trended. But beneath the filtered snapshots, something darker was building. A resentment not just toward the wedding, but toward what it symbolized. Because the locals had seen enough, and they weren't done yet. In fact, they were just getting started. Number 5, the grumpy Venetians. If the canals could talk, they probably would have said, "Please stop clogging us with paparazzi boats and celebrity perfume." Because while Bezos and his entourage danced in designer shoes, Venetians were marching, and they weren't doing it for the view. Hundreds of residents flooded the city's narrow streets with banners reading, "Kisses yes, Bezos no." A slogan that sounds almost romantic until you realize it's backed by deep-rooted frustration. The kind of frustration that's been simmering for years. Rising rent, over-tourism, and a climate crisis that threatens to drown the city that once ruled the seas. Add a $50 million wedding to that mix, and suddenly, the floating city didn't feel like it was floating anymore. It felt like it was sinking under the weight of a PR stunt. Locals protested the wedding not just because of who was getting married, but what the event represented. A flashy display of wealth held in a city that's slowly crumbling from both water damage and economic imbalance. The more beautiful Venice looks in those Instagram stories, the more painful it becomes for the people who actually call it home. Some protesters even dressed up mannequins as Bezos himself and threw them into the canals, a not-so-subtle message that said, "If you won't leave, maybe your wax figure can swim." Others staged die-ins, lying motionless in the piazzas to symbolize the cultural death they feel is happening right before their eyes. And while tourists snapped pictures, some thinking it was just another performance art piece, the message couldn't have been clearer. This wasn't celebration. This was erosion. Even those who weren't directly involved in the protest felt the impact. Local businesses, unable to compete with the private bookings, lost revenue. Residents were told to avoid certain parts of their own city because they had been essentially rented out. For the everyday Venetian, the wedding wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a reminder that their home had become a backdrop for other people's fairy tales. Still, in the face of the backlash, Bezos' camp made a move. A strategic, symbolic gesture. Something that could flip the narrative from invasion to investment. But was it sincere? Or just damage control wrapped in donation receipts? Let's just say, not everyone was buying it. Number 6, greenwash or genuine gift. When the dust settled, or rather, when the champagne dried and the gondolas stopped buzzing, Jeff Bezos made an announcement. A donation. Not just a symbolic gesture, but a real, multi-million euro commitment. 3 million euros to support local Venetian institutions, environmental research, and cultural preservation. At first glance, it sounded like a power move dipped in good intentions. The money would go to organizations like Carilla, which monitors the fragile Venetian lagoon, and Venice International University, a hub for climate studies. It was framed as Bezos giving back to the city that had just hosted the most exclusive party on Earth. And for a brief moment, it seemed to work. Headlines softened. Some locals even admitted it was a start. A small win, one Venice council member said. But others? They weren't impressed. Because here's the math. The wedding cost an estimated 40 euros to 50 million euros. Private yachts, police escorts, dozens of couture outfits, celebrity appearances. It all added up. Against that backdrop, 3 million euros felt less like reparations and more like rounding up at the checkout counter. Imagine crashing someone's house party, drinking their wine, leaving a mess, and then tossing a 5 in the tip jar on your way out. Critics didn't mince words. Activists called the donation misery money. A few even referred to it as greenwashing, accusing Bezos of trying to buy back goodwill with pocket change. After all, he's one of the richest men in history. 3 million euros to him is the financial equivalent of a sneeze. Still, there's something deeper at play here. This wasn't just about numbers. It was about trust. The gesture might have come with noble intent, but the timing? Suspicious. It came after the protests, after the backlash, after the city had already bent over backwards to accommodate his dream, wedding while its residents were locked out of their own story. And yet, buried in all the cynicism, there's a question worth asking. Can acts of goodwill from billionaires ever be received without suspicion? Or have we reached a point where every donation is a calculated PR move? As the gondolas return to their usual rhythm and Venice exhales, the 3 million euros still sits in the city's accounts. It might fund vital research. It might save historic buildings. Or it might be quietly forgotten, like the wedding guests who flew in, danced, smiled, and vanished. But for now, the final chapter hasn't been written. Because when you mix power, wealth, protest, and pageantry, there's always one more twist waiting. In the end, Bezos got his fairy tale, and Venice got the bill. A city that's been fighting to stay afloat, both literally and culturally, became the stage for one of the most extravagant weddings in modern history. Love was celebrated. Champagne flowed. Protesters shouted. And somewhere between the vows and the violin solos, a city quietly asked itself, was it worth it? Maybe this wasn't just a wedding. Maybe it was a mirror, held up to wealth, power, and the cost of spectacle. And while the final toast has been made, one question still lingers in the Venetian fog. Did Venice host a wedding or surrender its soul?